The sound of bagpipes cut through the gunfire. German soldiers looked up in disbelief. Racing toward their position was a man wielding a medieval sword, arrows strapped to his back, a figure who seemed to have stepped straight out of the pages of history. In an age of mechanized warfare where tanks ruled the battlefield and machine guns defined modern combat, one British officer chose a radically different path. Armed with weapons that would have been familiar to Richard the Lionheart, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill became living proof that sometimes, the old ways are the deadliest. His fellow soldiers called him Mad Jack. His enemies called him a demon. History would remember him as the man who brought medieval warfare to World War II, and proved that one man's madness could become military genius. This is the story of how a bagpipe-playing, sword-wielding warrior became one of the most extraordinary soldiers in modern military history. To understand how a 20th-century soldier came to embrace medieval combat, we must first journey to British Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, in 1906. Here, among the tea plantations and colonial mansions of Britain's Eastern Empire, John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born into a world of fading imperial glory. The Churchill family, though sharing a name with the future Prime Minister, was not of his lineage. They were career civil servants, part of the vast bureaucratic machine that kept the British Empire running. Young Jack's father, Alec Fleming Churchill, served as the Director of Public Works in Ceylon, while his mother, Eleanor Elizabeth, maintained the household in the traditional colonial style. But Jack was anything but traditional. From his earliest years, he displayed an almost supernatural ability to find adventure and trouble. His childhood was a whirlwind tour of the empire, from the bustling streets of Hong Kong to the formal drawing rooms of England. By 1926, at age 20, Jack entered the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. Here, among the rigid discipline and formal military training, his eccentric character began to truly emerge. While other cadets focused on modern military tactics, Jack was often found practicing archery on the college grounds or teaching himself to play the bagpipes, much to the confusion of his instructors and the amusement of his fellow cadets. Upon graduation, fate, or perhaps Jack's own magnetic attraction to the unusual, led him to the Manchester Regiment and a posting in Burma. It was here, in the dense jungles and steep mountains of Southeast Asia, that Mad Jack's legend truly began to take shape. While other officers adhered to conventional military transport, Jack acquired a Zenith motorcycle, a powerful machine that would become his trusted companion through some of the most dangerous terrain in the empire. His solo journeys became legendary among both British forces and local populations. These weren't simple joy rides. Churchill would embark on solo expeditions spanning up to 1,500 miles through virtually unmapped jungle terrain. He navigated paths that barely deserved the name, crossing rickety bridges that hadn't seen maintenance since the previous century. Perhaps his most daring regular feat was his method of crossing the deep gorges that cut through the Burmese landscape. Where bridges had failed or never existed, Jack would carefully balance his motorcycle along railroad tracks, walking beside it on the sleepers, with drops of hundreds of feet on either side. The roar of rivers below was his only companion on these death-defying crossings. Local officials reported numerous close calls. In one incident, Jack collided with a water buffalo, a meeting that could have easily proved fatal. Instead of being deterred, he simply added it to his growing collection of adventure stories. When questioned about the risks, he would simply shrug and say, "If it's not challenging, it's not worth doing." By the mid-1930s, Jack Churchill had already lived more adventures than most men would in a lifetime. But for him, this was merely a warm-up. As storm clouds gathered over Europe, Churchill embarked on a series of pursuits that would seem eccentric even by today's standards. His first conquest? The distinctly Scottish art of bagpiping. For an Englishman to take up the pipes was unusual enough, but Jack never did anything halfway. He spent countless hours practicing, often to the dismay of his neighbors, until he had mastered the complex instrument. In 1938, he entered the piping championships at Aldershot, the only Englishman among a sea of Scottish competitors. The betting odds against him were astronomical. Yet when the dust settled, Jack Churchill had claimed second place, earning reluctant respect from even the most traditional Highland pipers. But it was archery that truly captured his imagination. While most sportsmen of the era used modern recurve bows, Jack insisted on mastering the traditional English longbow, a weapon that had last seen serious military use in the 15th century. He spent years studying medieval texts on archery, crafting his own arrows and practicing ancient shooting techniques. His dedication led him to the 1939 World Archery Championships in Oslo. Among competitors wielding the latest in modern archery technology, Churchill stood out with his massive longbow, a replica of those used at Agincourt. Though he placed 26th overall, his presence made a lasting impression on the archery world. Between these pursuits, Churchill found time for yet another career, acting. His striking presence and natural flair for the dramatic caught Hollywood's attention. He appeared in The Thief of Baghdad and A Yank at Oxford, though he often complained that the sword fights were disappointingly unrealistic. He even tried his hand at journalism, working as a newspaper editor and occasional model. But these peaceful pursuits couldn't satisfy his appetite for adventure forever. As Europe marched toward war, Jack Churchill prepared himself, not for the modern battlefield, but for the kind of warfare he had always dreamed of. While other officers studied tank warfare and machine gun tactics, Churchill spent his evenings practicing with his Scottish broadsword. If the medieval knights could defeat armies with these weapons, he would say, then so can we. Most dismissed him as an eccentric, but they would soon learn just how effective ancient warfare could be in modern combat. September 1939. As Hitler's army stormed across Poland, Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. While most soldiers packed standard-issue rifles and bayonets, Jack Churchill prepared a very different kit for war. His combat gear read like a museum inventory: a Scottish claymore sword, meticulously sharpened, a full-size longbow of English yew, a quiver of broadhead arrows, each fletched by hand, and of course his trusty bagpipes. When questioned about this unusual arsenal, Churchill delivered what would become his most famous quote: "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." Initially posted to France with the British Expeditionary Force, Churchill found the early months of the war frustratingly quiet. The phony war period of 1939 to 40 saw him patrolling the Maginot Line, occasionally serenading his troops with bagpipe renditions of Scottish battle songs. But in May 1940 the real war began. Near the French village of Lepinette, Churchill finally got his chance to prove that ancient weapons still had a place in modern warfare. During a German infantry advance, he calmly stepped out from behind cover, drew his longbow to full draw, and released. The arrow struck a German sergeant squarely in the chest, the first confirmed longbow kill in combat since the 1700s. Churchill's fellow officers were stunned. The Germans were outraged. And Mad Jack. He simply reached for another arrow. This incident caught the attention of the newly formed commando units. These elite troops needed unconventional warriors, and no one was more unconventional than Jack Churchill. He joined No. 2 Commando in 1940, quickly establishing himself as both a tactical innovator and an inspiration to his men. Churchill's commando training added modern weapons and tactics to his medieval arsenal. But he never abandoned his signature style. During stealth training exercises, he would often demonstrate how much quieter a sword was than a gun. In hand-to-hand combat classes, he showed how ancient Scottish wrestling techniques could overcome modern defense methods. December 27, 1941. The Nazi occupation of Norway was about to witness something unprecedented in modern warfare. As dawn broke over the frozen fjords near Vagsøy, British commandos prepared for Operation Archery, a raid that would become legendary, thanks to one extraordinary officer. As the landing craft approached the snow-covered beach, German defenders manned their positions, expecting the usual sounds of battle. Instead, through the pre-dawn mist, came the unmistakable wail of bagpipes playing March of the Cameron Men. Standing at the front of the lead landing craft, Jack Churchill cut an impossible figure. His sword gleamed in the winter light. His pipes echoed across the water. As the ramp dropped, he leapt forward, sword raised, and gave a blood-curdling Highland war cry that struck terror into the German defenders. Churchill led the charge up the cliffs, alternating between throwing grenades and playing his pipes. His men, inspired by this display of warrior spirit, followed him into the teeth of heavy machine gun fire. One German survivor later reported that they thought they were being attacked by an ancient Viking raiding party. The raid was a complete success. The German garrison was overwhelmed, their coastal batteries destroyed. Churchill personally led the capture of a German artillery position, approaching it from the rear and taking the entire gun crew prisoner with nothing but his broadsword. His official report was characteristically understated: "I took their attention with the pipes, then moved in with the sword. They seemed rather surprised." By 1943, Churchill's reputation had spread throughout the Allied forces. As the invasion of Sicily approached, he was given command of a special unit within 2 commando men specially selected for their ability to keep up with their eccentric leader. During the Sicily landings, Churchill again led from the front. But this time he added a new element to his arsenal. Along with his sword, bow and pipes, he carried a walking stick. When asked why, he replied, "That's how a proper British officer should look when taking a beach." It was during the fighting around Catania that Churchill performed one of his most remarkable feats. Leading a patrol through the Italian countryside, he encountered a German unit of roughly 42 men. Most officers would have retreated or called for reinforcements. Churchill had other ideas. With his sword in one hand and his walking stick in the other, he simply walked into the German position and demanded their surrender. The German commander, completely bewildered by this apparition from another century, actually complied. Churchill then made the prisoners carry their own weapons and equipment back to the Allied lines. When asked how he managed this extraordinary capture, Churchill explained, "If you tell a German enough times that he is a prisoner with sufficient authority, he will eventually believe you." 1944 found Churchill in Yugoslavia, fighting alongside Tito's partisans against German mountain troops. It was here that his unconventional tactics would face their greatest test, and where his luck would finally run out. The island of Vis had become a crucial base for partisan operations. Churchill was tasked with leading a night raid on the German-held island of Brac. As usual, he insisted on leading from the front, but this time the odds were stacked heavily against him. In the early hours of May 5, Churchill led his men up a steep hill toward the German position. Instead of trying to maintain silence, he stood fully exposed on the hillside, playing "Will Ye No Come Back Again" on his bagpipes. The haunting melody echoed across the battlefield, terrifying some German troops and leaving others convinced they were facing a madman. But the Germans had prepared well. As Churchill's men advanced, they were caught in devastating mortar and machine gun fire. Most of his unit was killed or wounded. Churchill continued playing his pipes until a mortar explosion knocked him unconscious. When he came to, he was in German hands. His German captors were unsure what to make of this strange British officer. Finding his sword, bow, and pipes, they initially suspected he might be related to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. This probably saved his life, as Hitler's infamous commando order called for the immediate execution of captured commandos. Sachsenhausen concentration camp, 40 kilometers north of Berlin. This was where the Germans sent their most troublesome prisoners. They were about to learn that they had never dealt with anyone quite like Jack Churchill. Despite brutal conditions and constant surveillance, Churchill immediately began planning his escape. Together with an RAF officer, he meticulously observed guard patterns, mapped blind spots, and began an ambitious tunneling operation. Using improvised tools and remarkable ingenuity, they spent months digging a tunnel beneath the camp's outer walls. Their work had to be perfectly concealed. Discovery meant certain death. They used bedboards to shore up their tunnel and distributed excavated dirt in the camp's vegetable gardens during exercise periods. In September 1944, Churchill and his companion finally broke through. Under cover of darkness, they crawled through their narrow tunnel and emerged beyond the camp's perimeter. For a week, they evaded German patrols, surviving on stolen vegetables from local farms. But freedom was short-lived. Exhausted and starving, they were recaptured near the Baltic coast. The German response was to send Churchill to an even more secure location, the Tyrol camp in Austria. Most men would have given up. Churchill saw it as a fresh challenge. In this new prison, he noticed something crucial. The guards had become complacent as Allied armies approached from both east and west. During a power outage in April 1945, Churchill made his move. While other prisoners huddled in their barracks, he simply walked out through the main gate, carrying a shovel as if assigned to work detail. The guards, accustomed to his eccentric behavior, barely gave him a second glance. What followed was an epic 8-day journey across the Alps. Churchill marched over 150 kilometers through mountain passes, evading German patrols and living off the land. He followed railroad tracks by night, hoping they would lead to Italy. After an arduous trek, he encountered an American armored column near Verona, Italy. His first words to his rescuers? "My good man, would you happen to have any tea?" Most men would have considered their war stories complete. For Jack Churchill, peace just meant finding new forms of adventure. Now promoted to lieutenant colonel, he volunteered for the British Mandate in Palestine, one of the most dangerous postings available. In April 1948, he found himself in the midst of the Hadassah medical convoy massacre. As Arab forces attacked the Jewish medical convoy, Churchill stood in the middle of the firefight, attempting to arrange a ceasefire. When that failed, he organized the evacuation of 700 Jewish doctors, students, and patients from the Hadassah hospital. At age 40, most officers were considering retirement. Churchill decided to become a parachutist. He qualified for his wings and was posted to Britain's Seaforth Highlanders, where he could indulge his love of Scottish military traditions. His next posting took him to Australia as an instructor at the Land Air Warfare School. Here he discovered surfing, a sport still rare outside Hawaii and California. But regular surfing wasn't enough for Mad Jack. Returning to England, he became fascinated by the Severn Bore, a tidal surge that creates a 5-foot wave moving up the River Severn. In 1955, he became the first person to surf this phenomenon, riding it for over a mile on a board he designed himself. His transport to these surfing expeditions? The legendary Vincent Black Lightning motorcycle, the fastest production motorcycle in the world. Churchill would tear through the English countryside at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour, often leaving pursuing police vehicles far behind. Even in his later years, Churchill refused to embrace a quiet life. He could often be found on the banks of the Thames, commanding a fleet of radio-controlled miniature warships, recreating famous naval battles for amazed onlookers. His daily commute became legendary among local rail workers. To avoid carrying his briefcase from the station, he would simply throw it into his garden as the train passed by his house. When questioned about this practice, he replied, "I have yet to lose a briefcase." Jack Churchill passed away peacefully in 1996 at the age of 89. His weapons now rest in museums, the sword, the bow, the pipes that became symbols of his extraordinary life. But his legacy lives on in military circles worldwide. He remains the only soldier in modern history to have confirmed kills with a longbow in combat. His exploits are still taught at military academies as examples of how individual courage and unconventional thinking can change the course of battle. In an age of increasing mechanization and remote warfare, Mad Jack Churchill proved that the warrior spirit of ancient times could still triumph. As he often said, "If you're going down, go down swinging." Commando, archer, piper, surfer, escape artist, and above all, a true original, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill showed the world that sometimes, the most effective soldier is the one who refuses to play by the rules of modern warfare. Subscribe for more extraordinary tales of history's greatest warriors, adventurers, and eccentric heroes.